Hi, and welcome to Experience Points by University XP. On Experience Points, we explore different ways we can learn from games. I'm your host, Dave Eng from Game-Based Learning by University XP. Find out more at universityxp.com. On today's episode, we'll learn from Dr. Raul Alberto Mora. Dr. Mora is an associate professor at the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana in Medellin, Colombia. He leads the Literacies in Second Languages project, where he explores how people learn languages in cities, gaming spaces, and multilingual communities. Dr. Mora's work spans critical literacy, language education, and the thoughtful use of AI in teaching. He has recently co-published the book Understanding Second Language Users as Gamers, Language as Victory. Dr. Mora, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here to share with the work with this book.
Great. I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad to talk about the book. And I want to get into that with the very first question, which is language as victory. So I know we had connected prior to this interview about your book and about your work in general. But for the benefit of all the listeners, can you give us a really broad overview of your book? And as you said in our discussions, the book was created, quote, by gamers, not just about gamers. So what does that distinction mean for you in practice?
Okay. Yeah, that's great. So, kind of to talk about the book begins with two fundamental questions. What's the relationship between gamers and second languages, in particular English? Do language learners gravitate to games, or do gamers gravitate to languages? And once we establish that usually gamers gravitate to second languages, there comes the second question, which is why do they gravitate to those languages? And when I asked my team about the question, the first answer we had was, well, to win the game. And that to win the game created the entire languages victory framework, where we start looking at how gamers begin to interact with second languages, English and others that appear in games, as a way to participate in the game, to play, to succeed in the game, to thrive, and also to be part of these extended communities, guilds and other spaces, social media. And as they navigate language, how that helps them make better sense of the entire gaming situation. So how they use different vocabulary strategies, how they use semiotic markers within the games, how they engage with the game, and then how that even melds with their identity as gamers, as human beings, as teachers, as parents, etc. And the question about by gamers, not just about gamers, that came as the result of our extended review of the existing literature in the field. We noticed there were a lot of books and articles where they looked at what gamers did, and they observed the games, and then researchers looked at specific games, but we didn't find any research where we had gamers directly involved in the research endeavor. And I can tell you that if I hadn't edited the book with the gamers in my team, in Team LAV, involved from the outset, the book would be completely different. It would be an entirely different book. Because bringing their input as gamers allows me to make decisions about what games to analyze. So we can just go beyond the traditional. Let's look at League of Legends. Let's look at World of Warcraft. Let's look at Minecraft. And they start saying, let's look at Genshin Impact. Let's look at Call of Duty. Let's look at the entire Grand Theft Auto thing. And then we can say, let's go back in time and let's look at Pong. And let's look at Atari as part of the analysis. So that experience of having the gamers directly involved in designing the project and then helping us think about the data and then writing the chapters where they're bringing together, where they're meshing this the data we collected with their personal experiences, gives the book a very different perspective about what gaming looks like from that experience, from the life experience My researchers, they're still learning to do research. They're still very young in terms of the academic um, trajectory,
Hmm.
but they bring to the table thousands of hours of gaming.
Mm.
And those thousands of hours of gaming allow us to think about how to explore the gaming world from very different dimensions, from very different perspectives, from
Hmm.
very different points of view that make the experience more inclusive, more comprehensive. Um, in fact, it's even a learning experience for me as the mentor
Hmm.
of this cadre of gamers.
Mm. And Raul, thanks for that response. I appreciate it. I just want to clarify also for the listeners. So when you talk about gamers and using second language, are you talking about the type of language that these players may use specifically like within the game? Like you listed a bunch of titles before and exclusively like digital games, video games. But are you talking about like how these gamers who are say playing Call of Duty interact with each other? Would you say that's the focus?
Yeah,
Hmm.
so that's one of the foci. Yes, it's how we interact with each other, but how it within the game. Because
Hmm.
uh, in particular, let's talk about English for a second.
Hmm.
English is still the primary game, the primary
Hmm.
language. Sorry, the primary language in which games happen. I mean, there are there are growing communities in Spanish, growing communities in Portuguese or German, but English still remains the uh, the chief language
Hmm.
of the gaming trade. So when they're in these spaces, they start realizing they need to hone in their language skills
Hmm.
to interact with other players, but also to navigate the game itself. And if you think about today's games, there is a lot more language
Hmm.
in those games. When you think about how games have extended story modes and how there is all the dialogue that is involved in the games, you need that language in order to navigate those spaces, in order to survive the missions or to
Hmm.
finish the quests
Hmm.
or to go to the next level.
Hmm. I see. Thank you. And I think that's a really important aspect because I've read a lot of studies on applied games and using games and educational frameworks and everything. But I think that this one is really unique because it is ultimately a study about how these gamers use language, which brings me to my second question on academic inclusion. So, I mean, asked you about this before, Raul, and you clarified a little bit, but I want to dive a little bit deeper here. So, now you worked with a lot of young emerging scholars outside of traditional academic circles. Specifically, why was that important for this project? I know, again, we connected before, but for the benefit of the audience, if you could tell us about these emerging scholars outside of academic circles and why you felt it was important that you include them as part of this study.
Oh, that's a beautiful question. Just to give the context, when we talk about the Literacies in Second Languages project, that is a research lab that it's within my university, but it's a research lab that primarily works with
Hmm.
undergraduate students. And the idea of these spaces is to introduce these undergraduates into the world of research,
Hmm.
into learning to do research. In our case, it's not just introducing them to the world of research, but also introducing them to how to improve
Hmm.
their communicative competence in that second language that, in the case of our students, they're going to be teaching in the near future. So, my researchers are in a pre-service English education program,
Hmm.
and many of them will eventually go into teaching. Some end up going in other areas, but the majority of them will go into teaching.
Hmm.
And I think it's really important to promote these young emerging scholars because sometimes academic spaces may not be as welcoming as they should.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's really difficult for some of these young scholars to gain entry to academia. There is a little, sometimes there's too much gatekeeping
Hmm.
that would keep these young scholars in this place. So one of the things I really want to give credit, it's not just to the team, but also to the series editors of
Hmm.
this of the book is housed, that they took a flyer on the team. They took a flyer on me, giving us the opportunity to do this because not every publisher and not every series editor would be so welcoming of saying, so we have a professor and a team of 13 undergrads and recent graduates from a program. Let's just hand them the keys to a book contract. So I mean, it can be for some editors a risky proposition.
Hmm.
Um, and for our team, it was risky because it was one of the biggest academic challenges we've ever had collectively.
Hmm.
And we really wanted to do it very well in order to show other people in these academic spaces
Hmm.
that it's worth giving opportunities to young scholars, that if you create those spaces and you give them those opportunities,
Hmm.
they are going to rise to the occasion.
Hmm.
I mean, and putting together the book, we had a lot of challenges where we had a lot of turnaround
Hmm.
because of life, pandemic,
Hmm.
graduation, what have you. And everybody who stayed in the project till the end, they rose to the occasion and they really did beautiful work
Hmm.
in each of the chapters they co-authored.
Hmm. Thank you, Raul. I think this is really important because, like you said before, a lot of researchers may be hesitant in order to bring, like different intellectuals and academics into the space. A lot of young researchers, you know, like as one faculty member to another. What would you say to other researchers who are kind of hesitant about reaching out outside of like traditional academic circles for other, academics or researchers to join them in their study? Like, would you ask them to be like less hesitant about asking? Like, what tips would you ask? What tips would you give other academics who may want to expand who they collaborate with to be more inclusive, kind of like with your study?
I would say, I mean, like the short answer is go for it.
Hmm.
Now, the extended answer is go for it, being mindful that there is gonna be you're gonna have to be willing to take on a heavy mentoring role.
Hmm.
That there's gonna be you're gonna have to do a lot of mentoring in the process because I'm thinking about my team.
Hmm.
They're very talented young scholars, I mean, brilliant beyond belief, but they were still learning all these social conventions of academic writing.
Hmm.
So I had to walk them through the process, not only the process of writing,
Hmm.
but also the process of getting a message saying, by the way, you are the tank, aka the lead author of chapter 7. When 2 hours ago that student was not in charge of the chapter, and so it's also kind of how I'm gonna walk them through the process, how I'm gonna mentor them, how I'm going to help them realize that this is a task they can overcome,
Hmm.
that they have the intellectual capacity to make it happen and they have the life experience to make it possible. So, working with these populations as opposed to working with other colleagues who may have more experience navigating academic writing or the process of publishing, yeah, it's going to take up a little more work
Hmm.
and sometimes a lot more work, but it's going to be more rewarding because once you see the outcome
Hmm.
and you see the possibilities of creating these spaces and creating these communities. Because it's the other thing is, if you, for example, working on a project or working on a volume like this,
Hmm.
it's not simply about I mean, saying you work on the chapters and then bring them to me and I put them together. No, there has to be a sense of team building, community building for this project to happen. This
Hmm.
project is a project that we have one team that even before I started thinking about the possibility of the book, I had to create the conditions for us to see ourselves as a community.
Hmm.
Once we saw ourselves as a community, we were able to start thinking, we can start doing those conference presentations. And for those conference presentations, maybe we can write an article and then we say, why not a book?
Hmm.
But without building the community, without building those conditions where we feel comfortable working with each other, where we feel comfortable um, confiding in each other,
Hmm.
it's really difficult
Right.
to make that happen. So first, you have to build the community. You have to get those conditions, and then you can set yourself on the next academic challenges.
Right. Thank you, Raul. I know that mentorship aspect is something that could be off-putting for a lot of academics and researchers, but I know that for a lot of other faculty who are also researchers, that mentorship aspect is actually something that's very becoming. And it's something that I've liked too, particularly mentoring other academics and researchers in the field and knowing that they're ultimately going to be the future of the field in general. But that kind of leads me into my third and last question here, which is now that I think about it and the questions and everything you've discussed so far, Raul, this has kind of been like a meta study. So it's not necessarily about games themselves, but it's about that second language that gamers create when they play and when they form this community with each other. And then that aspect was also combined with the fact that you are approaching this research question, this field, through non-traditional means, bringing in other people who are outside of traditional academic circles. And again, that leads into the third question, which is beyond the ivory towers. So I think that academic literature and research is very important, but oftentimes, like you said before, it can be very difficult from an accessibility standpoint for people that are like lay people, there are people that are outside of the ivory tower, outside of the academy. So my question for you is, what advice would you give academics who want to bring their research into non-academic spaces using things like podcasts, like this podcast, or Twitch or YouTube? What advice would you give them?
I would say the first piece of advice I provide is um, be yourself. And by being yourself means sometimes the way we talk in academic circles, and we have to talk like that because of some of the requirements,
Hmm.
um, we can lean really heavily on certain vocabulary, certain uh, jargon, certain concepts
Hmm.
that in that particular space, they would work.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to, and I'll give you a very concrete example in an
Hmm.
anecdote, actually kind of an anecdote. So one of my researchers, we have sometime in the middle of February, I have a lecture at a university in Colombia in their doctoral program in ELT.
Hmm.
And my student writes to me on Discord asking, Dr. B, can I invite my friends? And I said, what do you mean by inviting your friends? He said, my family and everything. I said, well, this would not be the place because this
Hmm.
is going to be a very heavy on the framework and the methodology because I'm talking to doctoral students and I'm talking to doctoral faculty.
Hmm.
I told her, listen, we're planning to do some talks in local libraries and schools. Maybe that's the place because the language is going to be a lot more accessible.
Hmm.
I mean, I doubt that if I were to give a talk like this about the book in a library talking to the public, I don't think I would even use the word conceptual framework.
Hmm.
Just to say one word, like no, I would talk about language as victory and what it means, but I would not go into uh all the conceptual underpinnings of that. No, I will talk about what it is, why it's important to think about it. So as we move to these non-academic spaces, the first thing you have to let go is of this notion that you have to talk about all these little details that we talk about in the academic spaces,
Hmm.
and keep the language more like yourself, like kind of like think about. I There's one thing I used to really enjoy reading when I was on Twitter
Hmm.
a long time ago. Um, for a while, there was a running thread that said, explain your research to a 7-year-old.
Hmm.
And and faculty members were writing their tweets about that. And I was like, how would I explain? And I would say, for example, how would I explain my research about, or what I did in this book to my parents who love to hear about my research, but I'm not gonna go into this. I'm gonna tell them what's really important without adding all um, the more dense elements.
Hmm.
I'll go to the heart of the matter, to what's really important and to what they want to hear. So when you move into the non-academic spaces, you have to let go of certain things
Hmm.
that are the norm when we are in the academic spaces and start getting more into the heart of what you're doing. So,
Hmm.
like, really, what when you asked at the very beginning, what is this book about? So this book is about, yeah, it's about how gamers play, but
Hmm.
how in playing they also play with language. I don't have to start going into the whole notion of what I mean by language or what I mean by victory.
Hmm.
That is something that if I'm in an academic conference, I'm going to have to explain because that's what I want. If I'm talking in a public library or I'm talking in a high school, I want them to really get excited about the research I did.
Hmm.
And I want them to get excited about the research we did in the case of the LAV book.
Hmm.
So I would say really be yourself
Hmm.
when you are in the non-academic spaces and how you talk in those non-academic spaces, and let go of this of those expectations of some of the or those constitutive elements of the academic discourse, and really get to the heart of why you're doing the research you're doing and
Hmm.
talk about that. And I think that might make our research more accessible, more appealing, more interesting to all kinds of audiences.
Hmm. Thank you, Raul. Yeah, I think that's a really poignant way of putting it because, like you said before, you always really have to think about the medium and the audience that you're speaking to. There's going to be times when you're going to be presenting to other academics, to other faculty members, and then there's going to be times when you're presenting to people or talking and communicating with people who are not part of that background, and that's okay. And I think the whole purpose of this question was to better understand how to format that message for those different mediums. So, if you want to, but you're not limited to like podcasts, Twitch, or YouTube, you're going to have to focus on things that are going to be audio focused, things that work well for a live medium, or things that are visually appealing. And just knowing that, the people that you're talking to, your audience, the ultimate people who are going to receive your communication are outside of that academic circle. And not to say to dumb it down, but to try to explain things in as simple a way as possible, I think is incredibly important. So thank you, Raul, for sharing that, and I appreciate it. Unfortunately, though, we're at the end of our podcast time. So I wanted to ask you, one, thank you for joining us today. And also, where can people go online to find out more about you, your work, and the book?
Um, well, I would say one of the best places to find more of our work, and I would say because I want to really take this moment to bring up LSLP, the Literacy and
Hmm.
Second Languages Project Lab, because that is the very reason all of this exists, is
Hmm.
because I've had students who believe in this and they have been committed to the cause.
Hmm.
Um, Probably the best way to learn about us is through our social media. So you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok
Hmm.
with the handle LSLP Legion.
Hmm.
One word, LSLP Legion. So it's the same one for Instagram and TikTok. And then you can see some of the things we've done. If you want to learn a little more about the book
Hmm.
by looking at some snippets and summaries. We have video summaries on TikTok, and we have a little snippets on Instagram. So I
Hmm.
think probably that would be the best place. And from there, you can probably also get to my individual work. But I think today I really want to highlight what LSLP is and what we do.
Right. All right. Well, thank you, Raul. I appreciate that. I'm also going to include those links in the references or show notes. So, again, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I hope you found this episode useful. If you'd like to learn more, then a great place to start is with my free course on gamification. You can sign up for it at universityxp.com/gamification. You can also get a full transcript of this episode, including links to references in the description or show notes. Thanks for joining us. Again, I'm your host, Dave Ang from Games-Based Learning by University XP. On Experience Points, we explore different ways we can learn from games. If you like this episode, please consider commenting, sharing, and subscribing. Subscribing is absolutely free and ensures that you'll get the next episode of Experience Points delivered directly to you. I'd also love it if you took some time to rate the show. We live to lift others with learning, so if you found this episode useful, consider sharing it with someone who could also benefit. Also, make sure to visit University XP online at universityxp.com. University XP is also on Twitter and Blue Sky as University XP, and on Facebook and LinkedIn as University XP. Also, feel free to email me anytime. My email address is dave@universityxp.com. Game on.